working on a map scaling worksheet. And when you're scaling, you're using a larger or smaller object to represent something in the real world. And today, we're using this map to represent an actual town. So it's a smaller version of the town. So let's take a look at the directions. Axel had to spend 1 week at his grandmother's house. Below is a map of the town. Use the scale to answer the distance questions below. So here's the scale right here, and it says 1 square equals 800 feet, and 5,280 feet equals 1 mile. All answers should be in miles and rounded to the nearest tenth. And if you forgot, the nearest tenth is the first decimal place right there. So that's what we have to round to. So basically, we stop right here, and we can round to the nearest tenth. So we have to count the squares, convert it into feet, and then convert it into miles, and round it to the nearest tenth. So this is a level 3 worksheet because we have to do all that work. So let's get started. Day 1. His grandma picked him up at the airport. Approximately how many miles is the airport from her house? So first off, we need to find the airport, which is right there. And then we find grandma's house, which is right there. And we count how many squares it takes us to get from the airport to grandma's house. So we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So it took us 10 squares to get there. And up here it tells us each square is 800 feet. So we must multiply 10 times 800. Now remember, when you're doing multiples of 10, like 10, 20, 30, 800, you don't have to worry about these zeros until the end. So basically, all we're doing is 1 times 8, which equals 8. And we have 1 0, 2 0, 3 zeros that we need to put in when we're done. So I go 1, 2, 3, and we get 8,000 feet. Now, we need to come up here, and it says 5,280 feet equals 1 mile. So we need to take this 8,000 feet, and we need to divide it by 5,280 feet. And basically what you're doing is you're trying to find out how many miles are in these 8,000 feet. Well, first off, I look at this 5,000, this 5 right here, and I ask myself how many 5s go into this 8,000 right here. Well, 1 times 5 is 5, and 2 times 5 is 10, so the answer must be 1, because 2 times 5 would be too high. And all we do is multiply 1 times 5,280, which gives us 5,280. Then we subtract. 0 minus 0 is 0. We cannot do 0 minus 8 because it's too small. So the 0 has to borrow from the 0 next door. But the 0 next door says,
I'm too small. You can't borrow from me either.
So then that 0 has to borrow from the 8 next door. So the 8 becomes a 7. The 0 becomes a 10. But now this 0 right here can borrow. So this 10 becomes a 9. And then this 0 becomes a 10. So 10 minus 8 is 2. 9 minus 2 is 7. And 7 minus 5 is 2. So we end up with 2,720. But we need to keep on going because the directions say we need to round to the nearest tenth. So what we can do is we can add a decimal, bring it straight up, and that allows us to add more zeros. You can add as many as you want, but I'm only going to add 2 because we're only rounding to the nearest tenth. We bring down the 0, and now we get 27,200. And again, I ask myself, how many 5s or how many 5,000s will fit into this 27 or this 27,000? Well, 5 times 5 is 25, and 5 times 6 is 30. So the most it can be is 5. So I'm going to write a 5 right here. Let me extend this line a little. Let me clean this up. And we multiply. 5 times 0 is 0. 5 times 8 is 40, carry the 4. 5 times 2 is 10, plus 4 is 14, carry the 1. 5 times 5 is 25, plus 1 is 26. I'm going to subtract again. 0 minus 0 is 0. 0 minus 0 is 0. 2 minus 4. The 2 is too small, so he needs to borrow from the 7. The 7 turns into a 6, and the 2 turns into a 12. 12 minus 4 is 8. 6 minus 6 is 0, and 2 minus 2 is 0. I can bring down this other 0 right here, and this gives us 8,000. Now, some of you might want to start dividing again and waste all our time. But actually, we already did 8,000 right there, and we know the answer is 1. So if I put a 1 right here, we know the final answer is going to be 1.5 miles, because we know we only round up if this number is 5 or more. And since it's less than 5, we keep the answer 1.5 miles. So the answer for problem number 1 is 1.5 miles. Let me clean this up really quick. Day 2. He went to watch a movie and stopped at the burger restaurant and pet shop on the way, including the stops. About how many miles did he travel to get to the movie theater from the house? So he's starting off at Grandma's house right here. He's going to the burger place, then he's going to the pet shop, and then he's going to watch a movie. So let's start counting. He starts off at Grandma's house. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So he went 9 squares to get to the burger shop. He walks into the burger shop, he orders a burger, fries, and soda, and then he walks out. And when he walks out, you're going to have to count this square right here again. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So he walks 7 squares to the pet shop. He walks into the pet shop. He pets the puppies, holds some kitties, gets some love, and then he heads out to the movie theater. So he has to walk out again. So we have to count this square right here again. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So he walked 8 squares to the movie. He walks in, he orders some popcorn, and he goes to enjoy a movie. So we need to count these. 9 plus 7 is 16, and 16 plus 8 is 24 squares. So he walked 24 squares. And again, the directions say approximately how many miles or about how many miles. So we have to calculate this into miles. But first, we need to find out how many of these 24 squares will equal in feet. And again, each square equals 800 feet. So I'm going to multiply 24 times 800. But again, I told you do not have to worry about these 2 zeros until you're done. So I'm going to do 24 times 8. 8 times 4 is 32. Carry the 3. 8 times 2 is 16, plus 3 is 19. Then I add back these 2 zeros, and I get 19,200 feet. Then we come up here, and it tells us that 5,280 feet equals 1 mile. So we are going to have to divide 19,200 feet by 5,280 feet, just like we did before. Let me clean this up a little so it's not too messy. So we need to divide. I ask myself, how many of these 5s, this 5,000, will go into 19 or 19,000? Well, 4 times 5 is 20, so it can't be higher than 4. So it must be 3. So I put a 3 right here. And then I multiply. 3 times 0 is 0. 3 times 8 is 24. Carry the 2. 3 times 2 is 6, plus 2 is 8. And 3 times 5 is 15. Then I subtract. 0 minus 0 is 0. 0 minus 4. The 0 is too small, so he turns to the 2 and he says, "Hey buddy, can I borrow from you?" And the 2 says, "Sure." So the 2 becomes a 1, and the 0 becomes a 10. 10 minus 4 is 6. And then we do 1 minus 8, but the 1 is too small. So the 1 turns to the 9 and says, hey, buddy, can I borrow from you? And the 9 says, of course, and turns into an 8. And the 1 turns into an 11. 11 minus 8 is 3, and 8 minus 5 is 3. Well, the number is too small. We need to add a decimal right here. We bring the decimal straight up. This allows us to add a couple zeros. We can now bring the zero straight down, and we have 33,600. We ask how many 5s go into that 33. Well, 5 times 5 is 25, 6 times 5 is 30, 7 times 5 is 35. So it must be 6. So I'm going to put a 6 up here. And then again, we multiply. 6 times 0 is 0. 6 times 8 is 48. I put an 8 and carry the 4. 6 times 2 is 12. Plus 4 is 16. Carry the 1. 6 times 5 is 30. Plus 1 is 31. Then we subtract again. 0 minus 0 is 0. 0 minus 8 we can't do, so the 0 needs to borrow from the 6. The 6 turns into a 5. The 0 turns into a 10. 10 minus 8 is 2. And we can't do 5 minus 6, so we need to borrow from the 3. 3 turns into a 2. This 5 turns into a 15. 15 minus 6 is 9. And 2 minus 1 is 1. Well, this means we need to bring down the 0 right here. And some of you, again, might be thinking, I have to divide because we need to calculate this number right there to determine if we have to round up or keep it the same. But that's not true because right here, this is 5, right? All you have to do is ask yourself, how many times will 5 go into 19? Well, 5 times 4 is 20. So we already know that this is going to be less than 5 right here. So we don't have to divide, and we don't have to round up. So the final answer is going to be 3.6 miles. Now, some of you might be thinking,
I want to divide to prove it.
well, you can do that, but honestly, I'm not going to do it because I'm just trying to save some time and just trying to help you with this worksheet. So we come down here and we write the answer is 3.6 miles. All right, this is what I like you to do. I like you to try day 3, day 4, and day 5 on your own. Once you're finished, come back to me and we will check your answers. See you in a bit. All right, welcome back. You are working on day 3. And day 3 says, he decided to go climb Cousin Fred's treehouse, which is located on H Street. Well, here's H Street, and here's the treehouse. How many miles is the treehouse from Grandma's house? So again, we start off at Grandma's house, and we start counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So he went 11 squares to get to the treehouse. And we know that each square is worth 800 feet. So we do 11 times 800. But we don't worry about these two zeros until the end. So all we do is 8 times 11, which equals 88. Then I put back in the two zeros, and we get 8,800. Then we need to convert this to miles. So we do 8,800 divided by 5,280. Well, just by looking at it, we already know that this is going to be 1 because 1 times 5 is 5 and 2 times 5 is 10. And we're only looking at the 5 and the 8, so we know it has to be 1. Then we multiply. Well, we really don't have to multiply. We just know it's 5,280, and we subtract. 0 minus 0 is 0. 0 minus 8 we can't do, so the 0 goes to the 8 and goes, hey buddy, can I borrow? And 8 says, sure. and the 8 turns into a 7. The 0 turns into a 10. 10 minus 8 is 2. 7 minus 2 is 5. And 8 minus 5 is 3. So we end up with 3,520, which is too small, so we need to add a decimal, bring it straight up. This allows us to add zeros. So I'm only going to add 2 because we're only rounding to the 10th place. This 0 comes straight down, and we put it right there. So we end up with 35,200. And we ask ourselves again, how many 5s go into this 35? Well, 7 times 5 is 35. But we have all these digits right here, this extra amount. So I think if we do 7 times 5, it's going to be too high. So I think we should start with 6. So I'm going to put 6 right here. And we multiply. 6 times 0 is 0. 6 times 8 is 48. We carry the 4. 6 times 2 is 12, plus 4 is 16. We carry the 1. 6 times 5 is 30, plus 1 is 31. Then we subtract. 0 minus 0 is 0. We can't do 0 minus 8, so the 0 needs to borrow from the 2. The 2 becomes a 1. The 0 becomes a 10. 10 minus 8 is 2. Then we have 1 minus 6, which is too small. The 1 has to go next door and ask the 5 if he can borrow. The 5 says okay. He turns into a 4, and the 1 turns into 11. 11 minus 6 is 5. 4 minus 1 is 3. We bring down this 0 right here, and we get 35,200. Now again, some of you might want to multiply and figure it out. But if you just ask yourself really quick, 5 times 5 is 25. And this number is a lot bigger than 25. We already know this number right here, or this digit right here, is going to be bigger than 5. And your rounding rules tell us if it's bigger than 5, we need to round up. So instead of 1.6, it's going to be 1.7 miles. So the answer down here for day 3 is 1.7 miles. We'll move on to number 4, but let me clean this up really quick. Day 4, he helped Uncle Frank on his farm and spent the night. The entrance to the farm is located on J Street. Well, here's J Street, and there's the entrance to the farm. About how many miles did he travel to get there? So if we look at this problem, you can actually see that he could go a couple different ways. And the directions actually never say you have to go the shortest distance, but I think you want to figure out the shortest distance so we don't have to do so much work. And I think going down H Street would be the shortest way to go. So I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26. So he's going to travel 26 squares to get to the farm. And remember, if you didn't go this way, instead you want to go down E Street, that's perfectly fine, but you'll probably get a different answer, and then you just have to calculate a little different. Just don't go crazy and go all around town, because if you do, you're wasting your time because you're giving yourself more work. So I take this 26 squares, and we already know that each square equals 800 feet, so I do 26 times 800. And again, I don't have to worry about these two zeros, so I just do 8 times 26. 8 times 6 is 48. You carry the 4. 8 times 2 is 16, plus 4 is 20. Then I add back in these two zeros, and I get 20,800 feet. We have to come up here and calculate that into miles. So I do the 20,800 feet, 20,800 feet, and I'm going to divide it by 5,280. So I ask myself really quick, how many 5s can go into this 20? Well, 4 times 5 is 20. But you got to look at this extra amount right here. And if I multiply that by 4, I think we'd go too high. So I think the answer is going to be 3. 3 times 0 is 0. 3 times 8 is 24. Carry the 2. 3 times 2 is 6 plus 2 is 8. And 3 times 5 is 15. I am going to subtract. 0 minus 0 is 0. You can't do 0 minus 4, so the 0 goes to the 8 and says, hey, 8, can I borrow? And 8 says, sure. The 8 turns into a 7. The 0 turns into a 10. 10 minus 4 is 6. But now, since we borrowed, the 7's too small, so the 7 has to go to the 0 and borrow. But the 0 says, I don't have anything. You can't borrow from me. So the 0 turns to the 2 and says, hey, can I borrow? To let the 7 borrow. And the 2 says, okay. So the 2 turns into 1. The 0 turns into 10, but then we need to borrow, so it turns into 9. And the 7 turns into 17. 17 minus 8 is 9. 9 minus 5 is 4. So we end up with 4,960, which is smaller than the 5,280, so we know 3 was the perfect number. We're going to need to add a decimal, which allows us to add a couple zeros. I'm going to bring down the 0, and we end up with 49,600. Well, 10 times 5 is 50, and 9 times 5 is 45, so this must be 9. We multiply. 9 times 0 is 0. 9 times 8 is 72. Carry the 7. 9 times 2 is 18, plus 7 is 25. Carry the 2. 9 times 5 is 45, plus 2 is 47. And I'm going to subtract. 0 minus 0 is 0. You can't do 0 minus 2, so the 0 borrows from the 6, turns into a 5. The 0 turns into a 10. 10 minus 2 is 8. 5 minus 5 is 0. 9 minus 7 is 2. I bring down this other 0, and I get 20,800. Some of you might want to divide, but you don't have to, because you know that 4 times 5 is 20. So the highest this number could be is 4. And per your rounding rules, if it's less than 5, you do not round up. You keep the number the same. So the answer is 3.9 miles. So for day 4, it's 3.9 miles. Let me clean this up really quick before we start day 5. Day 5 says, one of Uncle Frank's ducks bit Axel. Crazy ducks. He walked to the hospital to get a tetanus shot and then walked home. Including the stop at the hospital, what was the actual distance in miles he traveled? So he's at the farm. He gets bit by a crazy duck. He has to walk to the hospital. Then he has to walk back to Grandma's house. Why didn't anyone give him a ride? Making him walk after getting bit by a duck? All right, so let's count the squares. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. So he walked 21 squares to the hospital. He walks into the hospital and the nurse says,
Come here, little boy. Let me give you a shot.
and Axel's like, ow, that hurt. And then Axel walks out of the hospital, which we have to count this square here again, and walks home. So he goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24 squares to get back to Grandma's house. So he walked a total of 45 squares. And again, each square equals 800 feet. So we need to do 45 times 800. I don't worry about those two zeros, so I just do 8 times 45. 8 times 5 is 40. Carry the 4. 8 times 4 is 32, plus 4 is 36. And then I put back in these two zeros, and I get 36,000 feet. And then we have to come up here and find out how many miles are in those feet. Let me clean this up a little bit. So we will do 36,000 divided by 5,280. We ask ourselves, how many of these 5s will go into 36? Well, 5 times 7 is 35. But we have to look at this extra numbers here, or the extra amount, or the extra digits. And I think 7 will be too big, because I think that extra amount will put us over 36. So I think the answer is going to be 6. 6 times 0 is 0. 6 times 8 is 48. Carry the 4. 6 times 2 is 12, plus 4 is 16. Carry the 1. 6 times 5 is 30, plus 1 is 31. Now, some of you might be thinking, why is he multiplying all the time? We already have the answers. We already did this before in the other problems. And that is a great observation. Don't keep on multiplying if you've already done some of the multiplication in these problems already here. So you can just use the answers you've already done and save yourself a lot of time. But since I'm erasing again and again, I will have to do the multiplication and division again and again. All right, so let's subtract. We are subtracting 0 minus 0 is 0. 0 minus 8 you can't do, so the 0 goes to the 0 and says, hey, buddy, can I borrow? And the 0 looks at him and says,
what are you talking about? I'm 0. How can you borrow from me?
So then that 0 turns to the 6 and says,
hey, that 0 over there needs to borrow from us.
So the 6 turns into a 5. The 0 turns into a 10, but then it turns into a 9 because the other 0 needs to borrow and turns into a 10. 10 minus 8 is 2. 9 minus 6 is 3. 5 minus 1 is 4. We're going to need to add a decimal and then 2 zeros and bring the decimal straight up. We bring the 0 straight down and we add a 0 right there. Well, we have to ask ourselves, how many of these 5s would go into 43? And 5 times 9 is 45, so it must be 8 because 5 times 8 is 40. So I put an 8 right here. I need to make this line a little longer. And we multiply. 8 times 0 is 0. 8 times 8 is 64. I write a 4, carry the 6. 8 times 2 is 16, plus 6 is 22. Carry the 2. 8 times 5 is 40, plus 2 is 42. And then I subtract. When I subtract, I get 0 minus 0 is 0. We cannot do 0 minus 4, so the 0 needs to borrow from the 2. The 2 becomes a 1. The 0 becomes a 10. 10 minus 4 is 6. And now the 1 is too small. And the 1's like,
why? Why'd I let him borrow? Now I have to borrow.
So the 1 needs to borrow from the 3. The 3 turns into a 2, and the 1 turns into an 11. 11 minus 2 is 9. 2 minus 2 is 0. And 4 minus 4 is 0. So if we bring down this other 0 right here, we end up with 9,600. And you don't have to divide because you already know that 5,280 at the most will go in only one time. And since 1 is less than 5, you do not round up. You keep the answer the same. So the answer will be 6.8 miles. So we come down here and we write 6.8 miles. All right. What I'd like you to do is day 6, day 7, and day 8 on your own. When you're finished, come back to me and we'll check your answers. By the way, if this worksheet is really easy and you don't need my help, then don't listen to me. Or if I'm going too fast, remember it's a video. You can stop and rewind and listen to me again. That is the great thing about having a video. So if you don't need my help, go finish the handout on your own. If you do need my help, I will see you in a bit. All right, welcome back. You were supposed to do day 6, day 7, and day 8. Day 6, he decided to go visit the local castle located on 6th Street. Approximately how many miles is it from the house to the entrance to the castle? So we first have to see, there's Grandma's house, and here is the castle. You can go different directions on this problem. I think I'm going to go down E Street because I think it's the shortest. If you do go a different way, then I guess you're going to have to make sure you multiply and divide and figure out the answer on your own. But I'm going to go down E Street on my worksheet. So let's get started. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28. So he walked 28 squares, and each square is worth 800. So you do 28 times 800. I don't worry about the 2 zeros, so I do 8 times 28. 8 times 8 is 64. Carry the 6. 8 times 2 is 16, plus 6 is 22. And then I put back in the 2 zeros, and I get 22,400. So then I'm going to come up here, and I'm going to divide 22,400 by 5,280 feet to calculate how many miles it is going to be. And again, I ask myself, how many 5s go into 22? Well, 5 times 4 is 20, and I think that'll be the best place to start. So I put a little 4 right here, and I multiply. 4 times 0 is 0. 4 times 8 is 32. Carry the 3. 4 times 2 is 8, plus 3 is 11. Put 1 there, carry the 1. 4 times 5 is 20, plus 1 is 21. Then I subtract, and I get 0 minus 0 is 0. The 0 is too small, so he needs to borrow from the 4. The 4 becomes a 3. The 0 becomes a 10. 10 minus 2 is 8. 3 minus 1 is 2. 2 minus 1 is 1. And 2 minus 2 is 0. Well, we're going to need to add a decimal, bring it straight up, and add 2 zeros. Remember, you can add as many zeros as you want, but we only need 2 because we are rounding to the nearest 10th place. We bring down the 0, and we ask ourselves, how many 5s go into this 12,000? Or how many 5,000s go into the 12,000? Well, 5 times 2 is 10, and 5 times 3 is 15, so I am assuming it is going to be 2. So I put a 2 right there, and then I multiply. 2 times 0 is 0. 2 times 8 is 16. Carry the 1. 2 times 2 is 4, plus 1 is 5, and 2 times 5 is 10. I subtract. 0 minus 0 is 0. The 0 is too small, so it needs to borrow from the 8. The 8 becomes a 7. The 0 becomes a 10. 10 minus 6 is 4. 7 minus 5 is 2. 2 minus 0 is 2. Then I bring down this next 0, and I ask myself, how many 5,000s or how many 5s go into 22? Well, 5 times 5 is 25, so we know this number right there, or this digit, is going to be less than 5, and the rule says if it's 5 or more, you only round up, and since it's less than 5, we keep it the same, so the answer will be 4.2 miles. So we come down here, and we write 4.2 miles. Do you notice how I always label my answer? That is a very good thing to do, so you know what you are using, miles or feet or squares, but since these are all miles, everything will be labeled in miles. All right, let me clean this up really quick before we start the next day. Day 7. He went to the park to play football with some local kids. What is the distance from the house to the park? And it says miles because all the answers are in miles. And so we start at Grandma's house, and we are going to the park where he's going to play some football with some local kids. So we need to count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. So we went 18 squares to get to the park. So we know each square is worth 800 feet. So 18 times 800. I don't care about these two zeros, so I just do 8 times 18. 8 times 8 is 64. I carry the 6. 8 times 1 is 8, plus 6 is 14. I put back the zeros, so he went 14,400 feet. And again, I'm going to come up here and have to divide to find out how many miles that is. So I take the 14,400 feet, 14,400 feet, and I'm going to divide it by 5,280 feet. And I ask myself how many 5s go into that 14 without going over. And 5 times 2 is 10, but 5 times 3 is 15, so it must be 2. Then I multiply, which you've done before, so you probably could just copy the answer or the number off one of the prior days, but I will have to multiply again. 2 times 0 is 0. 2 times 8 is 16. Carry the 1. 2 times 2 is 4, plus 1 is 5. And 2 times 5 is 10. I subtract. I get 0. The 0 is too small, needs to borrow from the 4. The 4 becomes a 3. The 0 becomes a 10. 10 minus 6 is 4. You can't do 3 minus 5, so the 3 has to go to the 4 and say, hey, can I borrow? And the 4 says, of course. So the 4 becomes a 3. The 3 becomes a 13. 13 minus 5 is 8. 3 minus 0 is 3. And 1 minus 1 is 0. Of course, you know what we're going to have to do next. We're going to have to add a decimal with 2 zeros. Bring the decimal straight up. Bring down the 0. And we get 38,400. 7 times 5 is 35. 8 times 5 is 40. So my guess would be 7 goes up on top. And we multiply. Let me erase that really quick. 7 times 0 is 0. 7 times 8 is 56. So I write a 6 and carry the 5. 7 times 2 is 14, plus 5 is 9. Carry the 1. 7 times 5 is 35, plus 1 is 36. I am going to subtract. 0 minus 0 is 0. Well, again, the 0 is too small on the next one, so we need to borrow from the 4. It becomes a 3. The 0 becomes a 10. 10 minus 6 is 4. Again, 3 minus 9. The 3 is too small. He's like, I'm too small. And he turns to the 8 and says, can I borrow from you? And the 8 says, sure. So the 8 becomes a 7. The 3 becomes a 13. 13 minus 9 is 4. 7 minus 6 is 1, and 3 minus 3 is 0. And you know we're going to bring down this 0, and we get 14,400. And we ask ourselves how many 5s go into that 14, or how many 5,000s go into 14,000. Well, 2 times 5 is 10. 3 times 5 is 15. So we know this area right there is going to be smaller than 5. And per our rounding rules or estimation rules, we're just going to keep this at 2.7 miles. So down here I write 2.7 miles. And guess what? We only have one more problem left and we will be finished. Let me clean this up really quick. Day 8, on the way to the airport. So Axel is leaving his grandmother. His grandmother's all upset.
Oh, I'm gonna miss you, Axel.
And Axel says, I'm gonna miss you too, Grandma. Okay, so on the way to the airport, Axel's grandmother took him to the donut shop for a pre-flight snack. What a cool grandma, giving him donuts, including the donut stop. About how many miles did they travel to the airport? So the donut shop is right there. Grandmother's house is right there. So we need to go to the donut shop first. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. So they went 17 squares to get to the donut shop. They walk in, they order a dozen donuts, yummy, yummy, yum, and then they head to the airport. So we have to count this square again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. So another 18 squares. And Grandma says, bye-bye, Axel. And Axel says,
Bye-bye, Grandma. See you soon.
and the plane takes off.
That's crazy.
So let's figure this out. 17 plus 18 is 35 squares. And we're going to take the 35 and multiply it by 800 because each square is worth 800 feet. But I don't care about these zeros, so I just do 8 times 35. 8 times 5 is 40. I write a 0. I carry the 4. 8 times 3 is 24, plus 4 is 28. Then I take these two zeros and add them back in to get 28,000 feet. So if we come up here, we're going to have to divide 28,000 by 5,280 feet. Remember, 5,280 feet equals 1 mile. So we have to see how many of those go into 28,000. And again, I see this 5,000 right here, and I ask myself how many 5s go into that 28,000. Well, 5 times 5 is 25, and 5 times 6 is 30, so it must be 5. So I put a 5 right here, and then I multiply. 5 times 0 is 0. 5 times 8 is 40. Carry the 4. 5 times 2 is 10, plus 4 is 14. Carry the 1. 5 times 5 is 25, plus 1 is 26. And then I subtract. 0 minus 0 is 0. 0 minus 0 is 0. 0 minus 4 you cannot do because the 0 is too small. So the 0 comes to the 8 and says, can I borrow Mr. 8? And Mr. 8 says,
Sure, I'm big enough.
so the 8 turns into a 7, and the 0 turns into a 10. 10 minus 4 is 6. 7 minus 6 is 1. And again, we need to add a decimal to keep on dividing. We bring that decimal straight up, and we can add 2 zeros to help us divide. We bring down the 0. Let me change the color back to red, and we get 16,000. So we ask ourselves how many 5s, or this 5,000 right here, goes into this 16 or the 16,000. Well, 3 times 5 is 15. Now the question is, if I multiply this 280 by 3, would it make it too big? And I don't think it will. So if we put a 3 right here, we multiply. 3 times 0 is 0. 3 times 8 is 24. Carry the 2. 3 times 2 is 6, plus 2 is 8. And 3 times 5 is 15. Almost worked perfect. So we're going to subtract again. 0 minus 0 is 0. 0 minus 4. Well, the 0 is too small. So the 0 turns to the 0 next to him and says, hey, can I borrow? And the 0 says,
What are you talking about? I'm too small.
so then he has to go to the 6 and borrow from the 6. And the 6 says,
All right, I'll let you guys borrow.
so the 6 turns into a 5. This 0 right here turns into a 10. But he needs to let the other 0 borrow. So he turns into a 9. And then this other 0 turns into a 10. 10 minus 4 is 6. 9 minus 8 is 1. 5 minus 5 is 0. And 1 minus 1 is 0. I bring down the other 0 and I get 1,600, which, if we look at this and this, we already know it's too small. So there's no way this number right here is going to be bigger than 5. So we do not have to round up. So the answer is going to be 5.3 miles. Then we come down here and we write 5.3 miles. That is the final answer. We are done. I hope I helped, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you for your support. See you next time.